Mr. Gutnick, I wanted to ask about Palau's trust fund, because you have given us a little bit of a preview of what to expect with the trust funds in the for the RMI and the FSM, and the concern that you have about greatly reduced, if not zero, funding in future years. Do you think that the Palau Trust Fund is in a similar situation? They're already drawing down from their trust fund now in order to just supplement their annual budget. So can you give me some kind of a prognosis on that one?
Right. I think the 2018 funding of the 2010 agreement has put the Palau Trust Fund in a better situation than the other two compact nations. You're right that they have been pulling funds out, but they've been doing that at a somewhat reduced rate in the recent years and are now up to their $15 million intended annual distribution. The Palau Trust Fund is only intended to last until 2044, whereas these other funds, while there's no either specific annual disbursement that's stipulated under the implementing legislation in the compacts, they are looking to be a source of funds indefinitely. The 2010 agreement put additional funds into the trust fund, our U.S. trust fund contributions, and we have not analyzed that recently, but going back to some of our prior work, this puts them on a very sustainable path.
So if they manage this well and don't take too much from that fund early on, it sounds like you feel that they're going to be on a pretty sound footing.
Right. Under the agreement, they are to withdraw $15 million annually, which is what was originally designed into their compact.
And so that'll work going forward to last them through
with the reduced
balance.
withdrawals and the increase that's coming with the 2018 funding of the 2010 agreement. Yes, their fund is in a much more sustainable spot.
Okay. So your prognosis or your view of the trust funds in the RMI and the FSM trust there look pretty concerning, if you will. If you're anticipating that you're going to see these resources coming, and there is either nothing in that fund, or it's so greatly reduced it amounts to very little. We've talked about the economic pressures that are brought to bear for other initiatives. What other countries or international assistance might come from, I guess, international institutions that the freely associated states could turn to if the United States does not extend the financial assistance beyond 2023 or 2024? Where would they go?
Right. Well, in the Marshall Islands, there's a recognition of Taiwan and a close relationship with the Taiwanese.
Right.
They have contributed to the Marshallese Trust Fund, and
in a significant manner?
They contributed, I believe it's $30 million. I'll have to check that. And my understanding is there's been discussion about additional contributions. The FSM has its own trust fund that's independent of the compact trust funds, and they have put funds into that. It's over $200 million at this point, and they are using this revenue that was discussed with fishing fees to balance their budget and allow them to put money into their trust fund. I don't know that the rules on distribution from that trust fund are established. It's certainly not anything that I'm familiar with. The RMI also has a small fund, they're called their D fund, that is outside of the compact trust funds.
And where
This is much smaller.
Where do they get their funds for that?
I believe some of that has come from the Chinese, and some of that, to the best of my knowledge, has come from their own revenues. I'll have to check on that.
So, I'm assuming it's fair to say that if the United States isn't there with the financial assistance that they would hope for, they're going to potentially be looking to whether it is Taiwan fair enough. China gets us a little more on edge here, but they will look to others for a level of international assistance and support.
Right. I think if you go to Micronesia, you see much more presence of the People's Republic of China. And if you go to Marshall Islands, you see much greater presence of the Republic of China or the Taiwanese. Yeah. So they undoubtedly, I mean, first and foremost, if there is discussion around economic assistance beyond 2023, I suspect that the trust fund would be an important topic to deal with. And secondly, you're very correct that the compact nations would be looking for other sources of funding.
Let me ask either Assistant Secretary Shriver or Outkirk, then, with regards to diplomatic recognition of Taiwan, how much pressure are the Marshall Islands and Palau under to switch recognition from Taiwan to China? I mean, you mentioned the tourism threat there. Really, how much pressure is brought to bear?
It's significant, and the Chinese are very opportunistic. I mean, we look throughout the region. Out of Taiwan's 17 diplomatic relations, I think broader Southeast Asia, Indo-Pacific, I think it's 6 or 7 are in this region. And there's a upcoming decision in the Solomon Islands, for example, and we've weighed in at very senior levels to try to encourage them to stay on sides with Taiwan. But in the freely associated states, again, it's primarily economic, and it's significant.
Is Outkirk?
I would agree. It's safe to say that the pressure on all of the 17 countries that recognize Taiwan is intense. It's ongoing, it's consistent, and it's across all fora.
And so, again, as we're looking forward to the significance of these compacts and 2023 and 2024, and where the U.S. is, what level of presence we have, whether it's financial assistance, economic assistance, just being out in the region, seeing and being seen, these can impact and implicate relationships such as this. I mentioned, or actually it was you, Assistant Secretary Dominich, you mentioned that Secretary Wilkie is going to be out in the region, which is greatly appreciated. But, and I throw this out to any of you, what more can we be doing to recognize and provide health care for those FAS citizens who have served in our armed forces? They go back to their home to live. It's a long flight to get to Guam, certainly a longer flight to get to Hawaii, and very expensive. But right now, these are the only alternatives, or the only options that are available to these veterans. We've talked about some programs similar to what we have in Alaska, where you have Alaska Natives who have served in our armed forces. They are living in remote villages where you don't have access to VA facilities. But it is nothing like having to travel hundreds and thousands of miles practically for that level of care. Does anybody have any suggestions that you can put out on the table for the Secretary to consider before he goes over there?
So thank you very much. I'm going to say this is not a suggestion, but I was able to sit in on the meeting that Secretary Wilkie had with both the President of the Republic of the Marshall Islands and the President of the Republic of Palau. It was a great discussion. It focused a lot on this very topic of access to VA services. And I will say that the State Department has, like DOD, has personnel in all of the freely associated states, and those personnel for the State Department are there with their families, with medical issues like any other U.S. citizen. And it's an issue that we do grapple with, you know, how you access care, whether care can be accessed via telemedicine or through some other remote method is something that is a focus for us, for our employees, as well as it is, I know, for the VA, for the retired servicemen.
I was just struck when I was out there and talking with some of the service members, their reality of being out in a region where your flight options, again, are very, very limited and very expensive. If there's space available, you might be able to get out, but the reality that you've got one air carrier that is moving in and out of the islands doesn't give you much competition and just much flexibility at all. So these are things that, as somebody that comes from a state that is not part of the continental United States and does deal with some restrictions on access, we can certainly understand and appreciate the situation that they're in. Dr. Gutnick, you mentioned the U.S. Postal Service and how the compact financial assistance has helped to defray U.S. Postal Service expenses in providing service to the islands, and you mentioned that we may be in a situation where we see U.S. Postal Service. And you also mentioned FEMA. Okay, if I'm living out there and you're telling me now that I've got limited ways to get off of the island, the support that we have received to ensure just basic mail delivery, and if we're going to try to provide health benefits to our veterans, more often than not, they're receiving their medications through mail order, mail delivery. But now there's a possibility that we're going to suspend or end U.S. Postal Service. To me, that doesn't demonstrate much of a commitment from the United States if we're really talking about an end to Postal Service delivery, an end to FEMA support. Can you speak just a little bit more of that? And I don't want to hyperinflate something that couldn't happen, but you were the one that mentioned it.
Right, sure. With respect to the Postal Service, the compact nations have their own postal services that operate within their countries. It is the mail that is to and from the United States that has been supported entirely by the U.S. Postal Service. If you talk to the Postal Service, what they'll tell you is that they expect the two countries to negotiate their way into the International Postal Union, which is the forum through which countries determine the rates and the reimbursements for mail transfer around the world. Postal Service will tell you that their cost has been about $9 million a year, and if the compact nations are not able to negotiate a rate within the participation in the International Postal Union, the Postal Service would expect compensation for any agreement that they have. With respect to FEMA, the FEMA funding, the direct FEMA funding, if a disaster is declared, will go away. USAID may still provide a response under the general authorities of the Foreign Assistance Act and USAID's operations. There's no guaranteed funding or activities there.
You also mentioned Pell Grants. Did you say that they were also in jeopardy or not? I wasn't sure how far that extended.
At this point, Pell Grants will continue, and they are a key issue for the College of Micronesia and the College of the Marshall Islands. Essentially, all students qualify for Pell Grants.
Right.
And so it supports a huge percentage of the budgets of the two colleges. Those grants will continue.
Those are not threatened then?
Those under current law,
okay.
those will continue.
Okay, okay. Assistant Secretary Shriver, I asked you about infrastructure on Kwajalein and the the threat there from rising sea level. When I was in Palau last year, a great deal of interest in the radar there on Palau and the installation. Can you give me any updates on where we are with that?
Sure. We're looking at a system of radars that would have both maritime awareness capability as well as air awareness capability. This would be beneficial to Palau so that they could see throughout their EEZ and monitor things like illegal, unregulated fishing. We would benefit as well from the data with respect to our ongoing competition with China. The maritime radar system, I believe we've installed 2 of the planned 5 radars. The air awareness systems, we are making progress on identifying sites and compensating the local residents for the land, and I think we're close to wrapping that up so that we can fully move forward with the project, but it does involve some compensation of landowners there.
And so is it a matter of determining how much compensation is owed then that has not been worked out?
I think it's a matter of each individual landowner, and as I understand it, we may be down to a single landowner, but we're making progress.
Okay, all right, well, good to know. I'm going to ask one last question of each of you. This area reminds me a little bit of the Arctic. You all know that I'm very focused on the Arctic and very concerned that an area that we view as this area of cooperation and collaboration, this zone of peace, that more often than not is just quiet enough that everybody leaves us alone. But things are happening up there, and we're seeing an increased interest from the military perspective, from a national security perspective, from an energy security perspective, as you're seeing more ocean that is opening up access to resources, but also maritime activity. This is also an area where, from the United States perspective, it's kind of out of sight, out of mind. I mentioned in my opening that you have some folks who just don't even understand why this committee has any jurisdiction over this in the first place. How did we get to be involved there? And yet it is a very key, a very critical part of the globe for U.S. interests, and our participation, our shared history, is something that is worthy of relationship building. But oftentimes, if things are quiet, if all is calm, we just don't work on building up those relationships. We figure that they'll be there for us. We're friends. They serve in our military. Yeah, we've got these compacts. We'll be good for it. But there's talk that goes on out there about where we are and how good a friend we are. And when there is a void, there will be others that will attempt to step into that void. And so I'm very, very interested in this part of the world as part of this committee's level of oversight. And while I recognize that today's a busy day, we got a budget deal that's been announced, we got a Senate Armed Services Executive Committee that's going on, it is something that it's hard to get a lot of us really focused on this. And so, like the Arctic, it seems now that China and Russia are paying much closer attention to what is going on in the U.S. Arctic and the Arctic writ large. Now everybody's interested. Everyone's paying attention. And it seems like we're getting to that same place with regards to those out in these insular properties. The question that I would pose to each of you is, given where we are right now with our relationships with Palau, with the Marshall Islands, with the Federated States, what do you believe is the biggest threat to our relationship right now? Is it on the financial side and our ability to meet commitments? Is it economic interests? Is it the military security, national security interests? What's the biggest threat to the relationship that this committee should be paying attention to? And we'll start with you, Assistant Secretary Domenech.
Thank you, and I just want to say, for those of us who deal in the territories and the freely associated states, we know, as someone who comes from a former territory, that you have great sensitivity to this issue, and we appreciate having a home somewhere, and we're very happy that it's here. I do think the greatest threat, to answer your question, is the renewal of the compacts. I think if they were not renewed, there would be a very significant impact to the economies of these three regions and would open themselves up. Of course, what's ending in 23 is the money portion of the compact. Compact does continue, but it would open the door for additional unfriendly competitors in the region to step in. So that would be my answer.
Assistant Secretary Shriver.
Secretary Mattis used to say, you can lose your sovereignty when a soldier holding a bayonet takes your ground and holds it. You can lose it through bad economic decisions and political decisions. And so I think what we're seeing from China is a very aggressive, assertive play to try to gain their own influence and ultimately lead to the erosion of their sovereignty. So our goal is to stay very engaged. I didn't have a chance to mention all our engagement because of the press of time, but I think I'm on safe ground saying we've never had such high-level attention from the Department of Defense. Admiral Davidson has been out. I've been out with an interagency group, Pacific Air Forces, Undersecretary of the Navy, and on and on and on. But we have to have the content right. It's not just visiting and showing the flag. It's showing that we care about the issues that they're concerned about, like the fisheries and protection of their EEZs. And so we will be focused on this and maintain our persistent attention.
Great, thank you. Assistant Secretary Outkirk.
So I would agree with both of my fellow panelists that the challenges we're facing now have to do with maintaining the excellent relationship that we already have with the freely associated states, maintaining the level of access, the alignment of our values and our policies, not just sort of at home domestically, but in international fora like the United Nations with regards to recognition of Taiwan and other areas. But I'll also say that rather than looking at the threat to the relationship, I think we have an opportunity here with our relationships with the freely associated states really to be what, like I said in my testimony, a bellwether for the rest of the Pacific. How we handle this relationship is absolutely crucial to how we are perceived across the Pacific. And the threat from China, the tantalizing option of sort of sweetheart deals, concessionary lending, is not just present in the freely associated states, but it is even more present in other Pacific Island countries. And so getting the relationship, getting our relationship, civilian, military, with the freely associated states right is absolutely crucial to getting our relationships right across the Pacific. And so if I could underscore anything at all is just how important these three countries are as a model and a signal for a whole host of other relationships.
Well said. Dr. Gutnick.
Well, I can't speak to the geostrategic issues, but I think it's very important to recognize the magnitude of the shock to the health and educational systems of these countries if U.S. economic assistance is withdrawn, it ends. You had asked what the VA secretary should do when he was out there. I would suggest that any official, the VA secretary or any official who goes out there should go to Chuk or go to Ebi and go to Chuk and walk through the hospital, walk through the whole thing, and recognize that this is the level of development, the level of the healthcare system with U.S. assistance. Same with Ebi. Walk through the town, walk through the entire thing, and get a good feel for what the situation there is with U.S. assistance. So that would be my thought.
No, well said. In fact, I was on eBay, and I understand it is the most densely populated place on Earth in terms of human population per square inch on that tiny little atoll. It was, we've got some pretty tough communities in my state. But I will tell you, I've not ever seen anything quite like eBay, where you have, again, a very flat island, very small island, and the mass of humanity scrunched on this small little island, and in an area. Kwajalein Atoll is extraordinarily beautiful, of course, but the trash, the filth that had accumulated there because it's so difficult to remove that when you have such density, such population densities, and you think about how you provide for a level of health care, how you provide for a level of education. Again, I think sometimes when people think of these areas, when they hear Kwajalein, you think, obviously, this is military installation, and that's all it is, and yet on that same atoll, we have that largest concentration of people on one small island. So it is families that are out there that we worry about too. It is their health, their safety, their education, their well-being, at the same time that we talk about the United States' interests and presence in a place that often too many believe is just simply out of sight and out of mind. We've got a responsibility. We need to maintain a persistent presence. We need to be engaged and involved. And I appreciate all that you have done to highlight that to the committee here this morning. So I think part of my challenge is to get colleagues out there to the region. It is extraordinarily beautiful, but again, as you point out, it's a very real place for so many people, and how we can come to better understand them and the role that they play as part of this country is a pretty important part of our job. So we appreciate the discussion here this morning. We look forward to working with you. I will again encourage those at Interior, Defense, and State to be continuing this level of consultation and focus so that we don't get behind our timeline when it comes to these compacts that we've got facing us. So I appreciate all your endeavors and the good work of you all. With that, the committee stands adjourned.